Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Mosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
This month's guest is poet Donna Isaac.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews. Are we ready?
We are ready.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to episode 7 of the Books and Brews podcast.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Although I was thinking on my drive down here, if we count from when we started, you are actually number 17.
Okay.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Because we had 6 at AM 950 and we had 4 at Barnes & Noble.
Wow.
So,
that's
but you were
seventh,
seventh of the podcast. That's a lot of beer.
Lots of beer and a lot of books.
All right. So how's your month been, Michael?
It's been good. It's been busy. My start to column this month actually was the history of craft beer in Minnesota, which I got to tell you is really hard to cover in a couple thousand words.
I saw that on our Facebook page.
And when it went off, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to get a lot of flack for all the things I left out." But everybody seems really understanding.
What did you leave out? Or,
Oh,
of course,
everything.
that would take like the next hour, apparently, to tell.
Yeah, no, there's just so many things that I left out.
Okay.
Gardening season is done.
Darning.
Gardening.
Gardening? Oh, gardening. I was like, you darn socks?
I do, and the season for it is done. I don't do that in the winter.
Okay. Yeah, I never got around to my garden at all.
Foraging season is done.
Mm-hmm. And what did you forage? Yeah,
I
know mushrooms.
I've been finding, I had been finding a lot of oyster mushrooms down by the river.
Never
delicious.
Okay. Did you bring some for everyone?
No.
Okay.
I dried a whole bunch, though.
Okay. Well, next month I want some oyster mushrooms. Well,
how about you?
I have had a crazy busy month. I've been wrapping up a whole series of publishing projects, Silk and Strands and Shattered Faith for Rebecca May Hope, and we just had her book launch. And that's a fascinating book about the historic Oneida community. I've been formatting a book called See That House by Judith Granahan, and I've started about 6 or 7 or 8 new music students. So that's kind of exciting. Wow. Yeah, I'm doing a little switching over to more teaching in my house now that the kids are older. So, yeah. How's your reading?
My reading. I'm still reading a bunch of books for the November Star Trek column. So at the moment, I'm plowing my way through this most interesting of books, The Brief History of Lager, 500 Years of the World's Favorite Beer. It's really good because everybody thinks of lager as like pale, fizzy, golden stuff. But the story of lager is actually way more interesting than that, including like where did lager yeast come from? It's a hybridization of a couple of strains, and maybe that hybridization happened in the gut of wasps. Who knows?
Wow. That sounds pleasant.
It takes you back through like brewing in Germany and Bavaria in the 13th century, and through the discovery or invention of Pilsner beer, and on through the American beer industry in the 1800s.
It is a rather thin book for 500 years.
But it's a couple hundred pages, so you can cover it in that.
It sounds like you could cover it a whole lot more if you wanted to.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a couple of months I had to cover for your reading. I thought this month you might have to cover for mine. I am trying to work through A Time to Kill by John Grisham, and I really, really like it. It's just that, time is at a premium this month. So it's the story of a black man in the South. His daughter is rather brutally raped, nearly killed by two white boys, as they call them. And as they're coming out from their hearing, he guns them down, and he does it very deliberately on the assumption that any jury is going to let him off because of what these kids, they're, 20, whatever, what they did to his daughter. And so there's a lot of discussion of racial tension and, well, what if I were a white man who gunned down 2 black boys who did this, So it's an interesting story, and I'm assuming he's going to get off, but we don't know that for
It's a
sure.
black man in the South.
Well,
Yeah.
there's definitely some tension. You know, the lawyer who took it believes that he will get him off, and his mentor is saying you better not be quite so sure. So, you know, there definitely is a question. So,
Who's our guest?
our guest is an old friend of mine, and that's in the sense of old friend, not in the sense of old
Well,
friend.
that's true too, though.
Well, I think it's true for all of us. So anyway, this is Donna Isaac. Poet Donna Isaac is a teaching artist who organizes community readings in the Twin Cities, hosting literary lights and cracked walnut readings. Her published works include a poetry book, Footfalls, that's her most recent one, a paean, am I saying that right? A paean?
A paean, yeah.
A paean to American folk music, and her formative years in the Appalachians. 2 chapbooks, Tommy and Holy Comforter, and work in journals, for example, Pine Mountain, Sand and Gravel, the Penn Review, the Saint Paul Almanac. Her most recent book, is it out yet? Persistence
It's coming
Edition?
out November 1st, I hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So very, very soon, about the time this goes live. So it's a chapbook about the love of movies, and it's coming from Finishing Line Press in November. So let me read a little bit of a summary of Donna's work. This looks longer on the page than it did on the computer. I don't know if I'll cut a little. After earning English degrees from James Madison University of Virginia and the U of M, Donna received her MFA from Hamline University in 2007, where she was awarded Best Poetry Thesis for her capstone, Sustenance. And is that a chapbook?
No, that was just the capstone thesis title. And I
Okay.
was going to make a book out of it, and now I'm actually working on something based on that.
What I'm wondering is, what is a capstone project for an MFA? Is
That
it for
would be
a
your
collection of
thesis.
poetry?
Yeah, it would be your thesis. And so it was an introduction to, actually, I based it on food because I also like to cook.
Okay.
So it's sustenance in the respect to eating as
Okay.
well as sustenance of poetry.
Okay.
So it's a combo.
Is it poems?
It's
in the
poems
piece?
primarily
Okay.
with
Okay.
recipes and also a nonfiction history, a background of poetry and food.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, that kind of is a little bit like my not a cookbook, as I call it, based on my writing, Food and Feast in the World of Bluebell's trilogy, if anybody wants it. So let's jump into the first beer.
Yeah, so the first poem is all about this lovely, kind of innocent recollections of a summer day. And so I was looking for something that just said summer. And you can't get more summer than Bell's Oberon. It is like the quintessential summer beer. It's an American wheat ale with a little bit of orange. And I'm just going to read what it says here because I think it sounds appropriate. An American wheat ale with a spicy hop character, mildly fruity aromas, and the color and scent of a sunny afternoon.
Perfect.
Especially on this November or
Yeah.
October
Exactly.
day when I can't roll the leaves.
And, you know, the last line of this, and I'm not going to read it now because I'm going to let you read it, but the last line of this seemed especially appropriate to me because this beer is the summer beer, and we're way out of summer at this point. And so I wasn't sure I was even going to find this beer anymore.
Okay.
So I feel pretty lucky that I did come across it. So it is kind of summer stretching on.
Okay.
The last days.
so
This
cheers.
is- Cheers.
Cheers. I'm going to try.
Yeah.
That sounds delicious.
It looks nice. I see the orange.
Oh,
What do you think?
it is kind of summery.
Now, I have to ask, are you a beer drinker?
I'll have it once in a while. I have a
Uh-huh.
beer. I usually drink red wine, but
Me too.
This is far from red wine.
no, I know. But yeah, in the summertime, sometimes I will with a
I
nice.
can see how that would be very refreshing on a hot
Yeah,
day.
it's super. Like I said, it is the quintessential summer beer. It's a beer that people like celebrate when it comes out early in the summer.
Yeah, I think it's got, a bit of a citric...
Yeah, there's a little bit of like
Definitely.
orange peel or
Yeah,
orange
I
or
can
something.
taste that.
So,
Unravelling. And this is from your chapbook, Tommy, by Red Dragonfly Press.
Unravelling. One perfect spiraling strip of apple dripped down from his knife while he sat on the front porch, afraid to break the spell of love that we learned could be broken if the peel falls in twain. We held buttercups under Tommy's chin to see if the sun made it glow yellow. Then we knew not only that he loved butter, that he too was in love. Everyone knew about the daisy and the plucking of each petal. He loves me not. The sun seemed a little friendlier then in the fields, with dandelion chains on our heads, clover behind our ears, and walking sticks scrabbling in jelly jars. For hours, the willow tree listened to our little girl's secrets, while we became fairies beneath its lashing branches. We saw hearts in the clouds and dinosaurs coming apart as the wind blew them into, perhaps, bears. Later, there was cherry ice cream from the local shop, or turning the crank for homemade vanilla, the dry ice smoking up our eyes. Maybe we walked to the park, played pick-up sticks, smashed caps in the driveway, or swam until we puckered like persimmons. We might fall in love with the boy down the street who wore red trunks and flipped water droplets from his hair. As the day wore on, we wouldn't come in until our mothers sang our names in a litany the neighborhood knew. The moon was friendly too, coming out in slivers, like slices of pie or half halos we learned the angels wore. Summertime went on forever in those days. Summertime went on forever.
Wonderful. So I love this poem. It's nostalgic for a time I remember well. And I don't know, when we're kids, in theory, life is simple to all kids,
That's
right?
right.
But I do believe life was simpler in a way then.
I think everybody can relate to the nostalgia of this poem. I mean, it just conjures in my mind, us riding bikes through the street with playing cards strapped to the
playing cards
so that it would make that noise, the motor noise as you rode.
And did you ever turn your tricycle upside down and spin the wheel and it was the ice cream machine?
Yes, I remember that too.
And Red Rover, red light, green light.
Mm-hmm. We did all of those.
Kick the can.
Yeah. See, I never played that much, but I lived on a military base, and so we were in a walled city with guards. We could stay out half the night, and I remember there were so many kids on the base, and my kids don't have that, so it's kind of sad. But, I remember that feeling that summer could last forever, and we actually almost believed the stuff about buttercups. And,
that's right.
It was kind of a magical time. So I wondered as I first read it, my own childhood was just like this. Is this how my children are going to remember their childhoods? Mm-hmm. Do you think that summers seem as long to them, or do they feel this rushed pace?
Oh,
that
I don't
seems
know.
to be our life.
You're the one with all the children.
I should have asked them in preparation for this. How many kids do you have?
I don't have any children.
I thought you had a son for some reason.
No.
Okay.
So this poem is, I have a big family. 7 children were my family.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, and then I taught for 40 years, so I had many children in my life. So there you go. And this poem is ironic because it begins a series of poems that are really elegiac because they're elegies for my brother who died young, Tommy. And so in some ways, beginning the book that way was how I remembered my little brother.
So this is the very first poem.
The very first poem.
How old was he in this poem?
In this poem, he would have been just maybe 3 or 4 years old, I would say.
Oh, he was very young.
Yeah. And we would do the buttercup thing with him
I remember
to tease him.
I remember that. Tease him that he liked butter. So,
or that he was in love.
Or do things
he was in love with butter.
That's right.
So that was sort of the genesis of this poem, of writing about the whole summer rather than a specific incident.
Right. It's really about our childhood and how, when I think of my brother Tommy, I always think of him as very young because even though he died in his 40s.
Oh, his 40s.
Yeah.
When you said young, I thought you meant like 7 or 8.
No, not that young.
Oh.
Yeah. But that was young to me.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. And so he, but I always remember him as a little kid picking buttercups and just loving outdoors, and we all love the outdoors. So back to your question, as children today, I don't see as many children out playing like what we did.
I don't either. And I know there are kids in my neighborhood, but I think, number one, I think a lot of parents are at work, so the kids are in daycare, they're in after-school care, and I think there is a sense of isolation, like, do we not trust each other anymore?
Well, kids are so scheduled up these days. They do things, activities, sports, or whatever.
Yeah, I have a story about that. When I was teaching piano in the 90s in Seattle, I had a lot of students who told me, I just don't have time to practice. Now these kids are like 8 or 9, and I kind of tease them, well, turn off the TV and you'll find a little more time, whatever. And one day I finally sat down with a couple of these kids and said, okay, take me through your schedule. We are going to find 15 minutes a day for you to practice. And by the time they finished telling me about swimming and Girl Scouts and tennis lessons, and some of them were doing like maybe Hebrew or Vietnamese, whatever, they were learning their parents' language, they would go through all of this, and I, as the teacher, ended up going, you're right, you literally do not have 15 minutes a day to practice. You are so booked up.
Oh, that's almost a shame in some ways to have that many activities back to back like that.
Yeah, and it's, I don't know, I guess it looks good on a college resume, but yeah, I've got to think some of these kids are going to be burned out by the time they're 18.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that freedom of being out in the evening and the crickets and the fireflies.
Oh, yeah, our mom used to say, go outside and play, and that's what we did.
That's what we did, yeah.
So we didn't of course we didn't have computers then, but we did like TV, because it was sort of the genesis of some of the shows that kids started to watch, but we definitely played in the neighborhood with other kids, and as you mentioned, kickball in the evenings and freeze tag and all those fun
freeze
games.
Tag, that was fun too. Or Statue Maker. That was
Statue Maker.
Okay. So what are some other poems that we will find in Tommy? It's all about him. Does it sort of take us through his life chronologically, or how did you arrange it?
It does. It starts with the kind of, it's almost memoirish, the Unravelling piece. And then the next one is about tying a kite string to a June bug's leg and flying it around in the summer air.
How is that possible? How big is a June bug?
A June bug is a couple inches.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
They're pretty big.
My brothers used to do that.
That doesn't sound very big for tying a string around its leg. Their legs must be
They're small. I think one of the things...
Did you do that?
No.
Oh.
Nope, not me.
Well, and one of the lines is that until a leg was all that was left, because often the June bug would fly away. So, and then it jumps right to him being a little bit older. He moved away to Florida, and then thereafter, I didn't see him as much because I lived in Virginia for a long time, and then eventually moved to Minnesota. But so then it goes right into hearing about a cancer diagnosis, and then they become more elegies, and then sort of the process of grieving goes through. The poems actually go through that until the end is more of an acceptance.
Okay, so he and you are 2 of 7.
Yes.
Okay. Are you the oldest, youngest?
I'm the third down.
Okay,
so
and where was he in the lineup? Younger than you, I'm assuming.
He would be the 5th down.
Okay.
So he was about 7 or 8 years. I was trying to think that 7 or 8 years younger than I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to some of your background. How long have you been writing poetry?
Well, I started writing poetry when I was a kid in just school assignments and things like that. I liked writing poetry, and one time I won a contest for a Christmas poem. I think that was in 5th or 6th grade, which was very exciting. And then I won second place, and then I found out that the girl who won first place actually plagiarized her poem.
Wow.
No.
So then I felt gratified that mine should have been first.
How did you find that out?
It was somebody pointed it out in a book, or I found it in a book, because I was a great
my
reader.
gosh.
So
did they take the prize away from her?
I don't think we ever told anyone. We knew that she...
Okay. I stumbled across that recently. It was really interesting. I was reading a poem and then I read something else online and went, oh my gosh, that poem is taken almost word from word.
Mm-hmm.
Just cut some words out of some prose. It was interesting. Like, who does that?
Yeah.
That, to me, defeats the purpose of writing. So
I had some great English teachers, and I remember one teacher, I think it was in junior high, wrote something on a book of poetry that I'd written, "You have a sensitive soul," and that really stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't write for anyone after that. I just wrote for myself in journals and things like that.
So would you say that you decided fairly young that you wanted to publish your poetry, or did you decide that later?
I decided that later. I was teaching English and all its variables, as I said, for 40 years. And also that kind of ruined me on writing, because I was grading so many poorly written essays and and you know, purple prose and poetry that was a little bit hard to digest. But anyway, wasn't. What's that?
Is that being polite?
Somewhat. I mean, but it took up so much time that it took away from my joy of writing. And so it wasn't until I launched into an MFA that I decided, hey, I want to do something for me. This is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. What inspired you to start the MFA?
Just another teacher at the school where I was teaching was at Hamlin. Okay. And she was doing, I think she was doing MFA. She was doing some sort of graduate program there. But she shared with me the literature and all the great teachers there.
It seems to me we have a lot of people in this area who have MFAs from Hamlin in particular.
I think so.
Because I keep hearing that from a lot of people. So who are some of the poets who have most influenced you and why?
Well, and if I go back to my early reading in high school, well, I was of the era of T.S. Eliot and all the Imagist writers, and so they were quite influential. I remember the jolt.
Just in case there are people out there define Imagist, I'm assuming it means
writers who deal with a lot of imagery, and that's what I tend to be drawn to.
I noticed that, and that question comes up later in the interview.
Yeah.
Everybody's always jumping the gun on you.
I noticed. Ever since Barry started this trend, I don't appreciate it. No, I'm kidding. So the Imagist, people who deal heavily in imagery. Yeah. T.S. Eliot, would there be others?
T.S. Eliot, H.D., Ezra Pound, let's see, and of St. Vincent Millay. I mean, there were just tons of poets that I love, but Eliot really stands out because when I read Prufrock, you know, I was just blown away by that poem.
What did you particularly like about it?
Well, the images in it, and also the layers of intellectualism in it, which I'm not a snob, but I'm a little bit. I veer towards things that are more intellectual. A lot of times, allusions, which made me curious to look things up. And he was so heavily into Greek and Roman mythology, and so that was just fascinating to me.
I like that too, though, because I think it's the difference between watching television and doing mind games and puzzles. You know, you can enjoy it on the surface, and that's what I love so much about C.S. Lewis. You can enjoy Narnia on the surface. Yeah, it's just these kids having this adventure. Yeah, but then you can think about it too and draw these lessons. So clearly, we can see how some of these poets and poems influenced your content. That was another question I had. Yeah. So I think we are ready for beer number 2.
All right. Beer number 2 is from Founders Brewing Company in Michigan. It's called Rubaeus. It is a raspberry wheat ale. Reading this poem, it's called Bloodlines, and it just deals with all of the various bloodlines coming in to make a person who they are. presumably to make you who you are, but that's an assumption on my part.
No, you're right.
And so what I was looking for was, one, something the color of blood, which Rubaeus is. The raspberries in it really bring out that red color. But also something that had a lot of different elements coming together to create the final profile. So it's a wheat beer, which means it has both wheat and barley grains. Obviously, there's hops in it because it's not beer if it doesn't have hops, according to the law. You've got the raspberries coming in, and then it is a sour beer, so you've got multiple strains of yeast and whatnot that are fermenting it. So you have all of these different elements coming together to create what is the final profile of this beer. So that is the concept behind my pairing for this. Shall we taste?
Yep, we shall.
Thank you.
I think you might like this.
You said the word sour, and I was thinking the exact opposite, but we will see. What do you think, Donna?
Wow. That's really interesting.
It is super raspberry.
Complex.
I do like that.
I thought you would.
I wouldn't call this sour. I guess there's sort of an aftertaste.
There's a tartness to it. It's not crazy sour, but there's a tartness to it.
I was expecting
No.
like I ate a little.
There are levels of sour.
Levels of sour.
That's really
A finesse to the
interesting.
sour.
I wouldn't even necessarily have called it a beer if I didn't know that, you know?
I think you're right. If I didn't see the word beer on this,
Yeah.
Beer is such a varied palate.
Boy, is it ever.
I'm learning that.
Good, Michael. That's an interesting...
I was
That's an
thinking on the
interesting
way
choice.
down about some of my favorites. The O Fudge stands out, and
Yep.
what was the one we had last month? The JW.
Oh, the
beers? W.
Lee's Harvest Ale.
Yes, yeah. I'm going to be looking for that one, but I do like this.
Yeah.
And so bit by bit, I'm starting to like the lighter beers you're finding too.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'll teach you.
one day we're going to do an entire episode with red wine, just because.
I'll be there for that.
I'll bring in my wine some friend Leslie.
That actually would be fun.
Because
That would be fun.
We'll have you back for that.
working with her is the reason that I pair to so many different things. Because we have done beer and wine pairings to everything, including yoga.
Really?
We've paired to. We were going to do a thing with a flower shop, and so we paired to different botanicals. So like
what,
plants.
she brought
flowers.
wine and you brought beer?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And then what did you have it out sampling for people? Or
Yeah.
Fun. Okay.
Fascinating.
Bloodlines. And this is from your book Footfalls, which is the most recent until November 1st.
Correct.
From Pocahontas Press, Bloodlines.
Bloodlines. Somewhere between the border of Scotland and Ireland lived the peasants of my blood, hill people who ate emerald green for meals, sustained by ocean water dotted with the heads of brown seals wearing wiry mustaches. In France, they were weavers, carrying osier baskets with linen, washing, like Nausicaa, the fine cloth in river water, to sell in the marketplace, to billow over downy beds while Mama baked bread and picked raspberries for jam. From Normandy to Norwich, anglicizing the surname, one who is affable and whose crest coddles 4 scallops mounted by a winged griffin on a field of red. One ancestor was Christopher Columbus. Another part Lithuanian, musicians and scholars. Some rode muscled horses into forests of oak. The crest is blue with mullets or a crescent o'ercrossed by ostrich plumes. Valiance and generosity the traits. For one part, there is no recorded history. The last known ancestor, Adam from Poland. They lived and worked on the Mississippi levee. My grandfather was a baker, a Union man. 5 bloodlines run in me, sanguine streams that pool and ripple in one transplanted Southerner who hears Appalachian tunes in her head while walking near 10,000 lakes. Maybe that is why the contrariness, artist fighting 5 torrents that tear through veins, churning, coming to an uneasy confluence, confusion in the head, a moiling in the heart. Maybe that is why, wherever blue mountains rise, I want to go there, to pick dried wildflowers in the autumn, to pick the melodies and bones of long ago.
Very nice.
You know, I read the poem, obviously, but as I was thinking about that beer, preparing that raspberries
There you go.
reference had never even occurred to me.
Perfect.
I thought it did because it seems so pertinent.
Well, it was. So I'm drawn to this book, and I need to actually buy it and read all the poems
thank you.
in it. Because, as you and I have talked about previously, I also live sort of in that region, and there aren't a whole lot of Minnesotans who have lived there. You know, I'm not sure many Minnesotans have even really gone there. I don't know. I met tons of Minnesotans in Seattle, so they all go to that side of the country.
So you lived in Virginia, or
I did, yeah.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
right. I
In
think we
fact,
did
I
talk
lived
about
in
that.
Virginia twice.
Okay.
I lived in. You're going to correct my pronunciation, Norfolk, right?
Yes, Norfolk, which is on the coast.
Right. I
But-
lived there for a whopping 6 months,
And I lived in Newport News, which is right.
is how far away I.
Oh gosh, that's only a couple hundred miles away from
Okay.
Norfolk, which is the big naval base.
Yes,
So,
yeah, and that's where we lived. We lived. My dad was at the Armed Forces Staff College. Long name. I have some fun memories from that time. But tell us a little bit about where you lived in particular. Was it all Newport News, or did you live various places?
No, probably lived about maybe.
I meant to add, I also lived in Fairfax for 3 years.
Well,
I lived in Virginia much longer than 6 months.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, my dad was also in the service.
Oh, I
and-
remember that. now.
Yep, and
What
so
branch was he in?
he was in the Air Force,
Oh,
and
so was
he
mine.
met my mom
And we probably talked
here
about
in
that.
Minnesota.
Okay.
And then he was a Virginian, so we ended up living in Virginia. But I also lived in North Carolina and Tennessee. We probably moved about, I don't know. Well, I lived probably about 10 different places in Virginia. And then once like in Johnson City, Tennessee, and Greensboro, North Carolina. But I was always most drawn to the mountain region. My father was born in the Shenandoah Valley
Oh, I
area
love that
of
area.
Virginia. Thus the blue mountains on
Right.
the cover of Footfalls. So Norfolk was, that was in our wheelhouse because my brother was in the Navy, and so I'm familiar with that. And we used to, I shouldn't be talking about this, but we lived in Newport News, and we would there was a Fort Eustis was close by, an Army base, and as we were teenagers, we would try to get the soldiers to get us beer. That would be something of your interest, Michael.
Yeah.
When we were teens.
I'm especially laughing because that's one of my favorite memories from living on the Armed Forces Staff College on the base there at Norfolk. And it pains me to say that. I'm so used to saying Norfolk.
There you go.
I'm not going to mispronounce it in front of you. I don't know if you knew that base at all, but it's divided by a big chain link fence with a guardhouse. And so I think it's housing on one side and some of the military facilities.
Okay.
So here we were like 8-9 years old, and there was this massive hole in the fence right by the guardhouse. And so we would, sneak along, and we were so sure that we were fooling this guard. And I'm thinking that he was probably like this 19-year-old kid, just rolling his eyes and laughing. But we were so sure because he never reacted. And we were like, oh man, we could totally get through. We could pull one over on him. Yeah. Growing up military.
Yes, familiar.
So you lived in this Appalachian region most of your life, actually.
Right. So my formative years were, I grew up in the South, and mostly always near the Blue Ridge Mountains or the mountains of the Appalachian Range. And so I'm highly influenced, and this book is really based in that because I wanted to celebrate my father, who died young when I was only 16, and he never really got his celebration, I guess, in a way. So I decided to write my first full collection about his family and his locale or his region. And
So really, 2 of your 4 books are memorials.
At
least 2.
In a way, this is not so. There are like elegies in here, but it's also just about the lifestyle, and a lot of it has to do with music, something you're probably interested in, because I use snippets of folk music or American roots music, especially as collected by Alan and John Lomax in some of the pieces in the poems.
And tell who are they? Those are names I'm not
They
familiar
are
with.
Smithsonian musicologists who they were the first and foremost musicologists who collected and went all over the United States, but particularly for roots music, American roots music, in the mountains of the Appalachians, to collect the music from the ancestors of the earliest known music of our country.
And those collections are phenomenal.
And they
Oh,
are
you're familiar with
phenomenal.
them.
Yeah. Oh, I have the CDs there's like
wonderful.
8 volumes of CDs or more, and I have all of them.
You would love, you and I should go to the Orkney Islands together someday. There is a guy there who is collecting all the music of, the Orcadian music. And a lot of it has never been written down, so they have these jam sessions, they play by ear. And I ended up there because one of my readers used to teach on Orkney. And so she told me, go to this place, I think it's called the Something in Real, and ask for Colin and ask to see his music.
Wow.
So it was really interesting. But as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, did you tend to live on base in cities, in more rural areas?
More on base when I was very little, so I don't have a lot of memory of
Okay.
that. In fact, I was born at Selfridge Air Force Base in Mount Clemens, Michigan.
Okay.
So I don't have no memory of that. And then we moved to, but not on bases. Right after that, my dad worked like in offices, and so we just got houses and so on. So no, mostly then in just different homes, and we moved a lot because he just kept changing jobs, or he was in the military, and that also was part of that.
So did you spend a lot of time out in nature in the Appalachians, hiking? And
Yes.
that sort of thing?
Horseback riding,
Oh, wow.
hiking, playing, obviously, as by the first poem that I read. And then we were always outdoors, on the rivers, wading in the creeks. That was my milieu, if you will.
I remember that well. My house in Virginia actually backed up to a creek in a massive wooded area. Did you ever go to Harper's Ferry?
Oh, yes. I love Harper's Ferry.
I love Harper's
There's a poem in
Ferry.
here about that.
Is there really?
About the confluence of the rivers, of the Shenandoah
really?
and the Potomac.
Okay. Now I definitely have to get it. That was my favorite place, and it's one of those places that just sort of calls to me. Like, if anything would make you believe in a past life,
Yeah.
that's one of those places that I go, this has a unique draw.
I can see why you would like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Why in particular?
Well, just the Scotch-Irish kind
Okay.
of your books and your interest in that particular.
Although that came later, much
Much
later,
later.
because I first went to Harper's Ferry probably when I was, 9 or 10. So, and right from the start. So I love the imagery in this poem. And, speaking of images, the people who ate emerald green for meals, how did you even come up with a phrase like that?
Well, I was thinking of Ireland, obviously, and I think I had just seen a movie about, are they called Silkies? The little
Selkies,
Silkies,
yeah.
And so the image of the seal popping up with the wiry mustache came to me, and then also the hills. When I went to Ireland, I was only there once, but the green, it just.
What do they say? How many hundred shades of green?
Oh, it's just.
There's a saying about that. Do you
Really?
Yeah, it's like 100 shades of green.
It's
or
just
200, whatever it
It's
is.
unbelievable. So that was the idea of that, the imprinting of green upon your memory when you see those.
One of my sons is actually in Ireland right now.
Wow.
Lucky him.
Yeah. Well, he's their father's from Ireland, so he's there visiting his grandmother, his aunts, uncles, cousins for the first time.
Wonderful.
So, yeah. But, wow, the brown seals wearing wiry mustaches. You should define, just in case anyone of our, I believe we're up to 225 million listeners now.
Yeah.
One or two of them probably don't know what a selkie is.
Oh, well, isn't it just maybe I don't know, but it's a seal, isn't it?
It's way more than a seal. It's a seal in Scottish and I believe Irish legend who turns into a person.
That's right.
And so they come up on shore, they shed shed their sealskin. That's hard to say. Shed their sealskin, and if you find their sealskin, then they're trapped in the human body. And so there are a lot of stories of the Irish and Scottish fishermen who will get the sealskin, and now they've got themselves a wife.
Okay, I didn't know all of that. I knew some of it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, but the sea is always calling to her, and it's usually a woman. I'm not sure if I've ever heard of a woman capturing a husband that way. But yeah, the sea is always calling to them, and so he's always having to hide that sealskin, lock it in a chest, and invariably she finds it, leaves her husband, her children.
I think you need to write that story of the woman finding a silky husband.
I love that.
Put that on my list.
Laura, you have to do that.
I want to put that. It better not be an autobiography. I'm thinking, is this what I have to do? It does sound more interesting than Match.com, doesn't it? What got you interested in your family research, or did this come from family? Were you told family stories your whole life?
Well, exactly. And so, as I mentioned, my father dying so young, that's why I ended up moving to Minnesota, because my mother was from Minnesota. And so she came back here to be with her family. So, which was a little bit alien to me, because Minnesota was winter, and there were no mountains. I felt naked, like I was standing out in the middle of nowhere without the horizons around me. So I started to think that the stories of my dad and his family would get a little lost. So I wanted to do my book dedicated to the family that I grew up with, which was his side of the family. And my mom's in here, but obviously it's more focused on his family. And their name was Pleasance.
Pleasance.
Yep.
Oh, that explains. There was a line in there that I wanted you to say what the family name was.
Yeah. Yep.
You just said what it came from. That's kind of neat. That's a happy name to have.
It is.
I like my friend Rebecca's name. Her name is Rebecca Mayhope.
Oh, I like that
Isn't
too.
that cool? Yeah. I mean to ask her, did you deliberately, put the May in there, or was that her birth name? Names are a cool thing, but I think that despite having numerous more questions about this book, we do need to move on to beer number 3.
Always more questions.
Yes.
All right, so this poem, For the Love of Dance, I will say, I told you before we started that your poems were kind of hard to pair to.
Yes.
This was the most challenging one. And what I was looking for was something, because there's just this expression of sheer joy in this poem about dance. And so I had no idea what I was going to go with, and I went to the store to get the beers for this episode, knowing what the other two were, and not knowing what this one was, and thinking, well, I'll just look around and something will pop at me.
Oh my gosh! I just looked at the name of the beer.
I'm staring at bottles on shelves, and one of the workers came up to me and said, "Can I help you find something?" And I said, "I don't think so. I'm looking for something very specific, and I have no idea what it is."
What was the look on his face when you said that?
A little confused. And I said,
okay, sir.
and then the look became even more incredulous when I said, I'm pairing it to a poem. I'm looking for something to pair to a poem. And then I said, the poem is about dance, and I need something that expresses just this pure joy about dance. And I'm looking at bottles still, and he's poking around on his phone, and he says, "Oh, I think we still have some of this one. It's called Let's Dance. It's from Urban Growler." And I was like, that's it.
Oh my gosh.
So this is Let's Dance.
Let's
from
Dance.
Urban Growler. So this is a light, I'm not sure what the base beer is on this, but something like a cream ale or something very light, summery beer, brewed with lavender and lemon. So there is a little bit of festivity to it.
Is that a David Bowie song? Let's Dance.
It is.
It's a David Bowie. I wouldn't have remembered that.
Cheers.
Cheers. What do you think?
That's really interesting.
So I really smell the lemon and I taste the lavender.
I think you're right. Well, you have a better palate than I do, but
Right, I would not know what to look for in tasting lavender.
It's
the
floral.
lavender is really abundant.
It's floral.
Yeah. It's not so. Sometimes lavender can be tricky in beer because it comes off tasting like grandma's soap.
Not a good
This
way.
doesn't take it that far. The lavender is very apparent, but it doesn't cross the line into grandma's soap.
Grandma's soap.
That's funny.
Too funny.
So, let's dance, and this is from the upcoming books. So I think we've kind of been going chronologically through your books, haven't we?
You are.
Except nothing from Holy Comforter.
No, I didn't pick one from there. Persistence of Vision, it's coming out by Finishing Line Press, as I said, November. So go to finishinglinepress.com if you're interested in movies, because it's all about me being a cinephile, if you will. For the love of the dance. The epigraph. Can't sing, can't act, slightly balding, can dance a little. Casting agents about Fred Astaire. Terpsichore did not bless me with her graceful gift, and yet I had ambitions. Ballet lessons at 5, square dances in PE class, bluegrass clogging at a family reunion, modern dance classes in college, keeping up with Dance Magazine and their love affairs with Graham, Nureyev, Baryshnikov, Tharp, Fontaine, Farrell, Ailey, Morris, Joffrey, Cunningham, Taylor, the Bolshoi, all those leotards and tights stretched over taut bodies, the polished wood of the studio floor, the ballet bar, pliés reflected in wall-to-wall mirrors, mocking me. Surrounding oneself with the illusion of dance does not a dancer make. So I worship from afar Fosse jazz hands, Palabolus's pretzels, Copeland's pas de deux, and all those Fred Astaire movies, his tapping, sliding, prancing, twirling Ginger, Jane, or Sid, full skirts billowing, long legs over their heads, top hat, cane, and white tails. I love Singing in the Rain with Donald O'Connor, Gene Kelly, and Debbie Reynolds, hoofing it on stage sets, tops of couches, mud puddles. 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, all that log rolling, axe swinging, jumping and spinning. Busby Berkeley extravagances with dizzying kaleidoscopic dancers. Or White Christmas with Rosemary Clooney and Vera Ellen with her teeny tiny waist, kicking up their heels with Bing and Danny, or any choreography of note. And since I'm no Pavlova or Beyonce, I'll contentedly watch Thriller Zombies, Line Dance, or Cagney tap Yankee Doodle Dandy, my toe shoes, dried leather, hanging on a peg.
Beautiful. So what I really like about your poetry, I looked up a few pieces online too. You have a sense of beauty and joy. You talk about things like Fred Astaire dancing in these beautiful long summers that make people smile, and I think the world needs more of that today. Good. So I'm wondering, I hear a lot of poetry that's, full of, we're going to change the world and anger and how awful everything is. So is this a deliberate choice on your part to say, I'm going to put some beauty and joy, or is this just who you are?
Well, I think it's just who I am. It often gets me in trouble because I'm
being happy gets you in trouble.
And I'm an idealist, and even when I taught, I remember going into the classroom thinking I'm going to change the world, and students just ruining that in some ways. Although I loved my students.
People do get in the way of utopia, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. So I think, I tend to look on the blooming rosy side, if you will. So most of my poems, not all of them, do tend to veer towards something that you're interested in, Startled by Joy, your anthology.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I picked that theme, was I just thought, we need to stop being angry about everything. We need to have at least a few moments where we go, hey, we're all in this together. Yeah. We can just let go and be happy for a little bit and see the good in life. And
I recently did Literary Lights reading, which that's my reading series in Saint Paul called Peace and Love, 50 years after Woodstock, because I thought we need more peace and love. We don't hear about that as much. We hear hate and dissension and words of negativity. So I think that is me a little bit. I don't think it's totally me. There are some gloom and doom, I guess, in some poems.
I think a poem can have a time for, what I would call maybe reflection. I don't know if that's what you're thinking of when you say gloom and doom, that some of them can be a little darker because they're reflecting, death.
Poems about death, of course.
And that's kind of a classic in poetry.
That is.
But I think it's because thinking about things like death helps us to live better.
Exactly.
When you think about the end, you go, what do I want people to be saying when I'm gone? I don't see death as gloom and doom, but there is a time for darker, more reflective times.
That's right.
Too.
Just about our immortality. I think that can be a theme in some of my works.
So, on a totally different note, what are Plobolus's pretzels?
Plobolus's is a dance company, and they do the most amazing contortionist moves.
Contortionist and all about balance.
And balance. You look them up because they're still going strong, but I think they were stronger. Probably, this is more about the 70s, 80s, that kind of thing. But they're still out there, and they're still doing those amazing configurations on stage.
Yeah, I became familiar with them in the 90s, I think.
90s. Okay.
So they were still going strong, at least at that point. But I haven't heard about them in a while. But it is phenomenal. Just watching them, it's like, how are you doing that?
Yeah.
Kind of like watching Bob the Magician, right?
Yeah.
I was in a practice room and raising children all through the 90s. So that would explain why I have no clue what happened in that decade apart
you were busy.
From diapers and
look up, go to YouTube, look up videos on Plobolus because they are phenomenal.
I'm excited to see that. So I have my opinion of your opening quote to this poem, but I'm curious what your intention was.
Oh my gosh. Well, I researched a lot of things about movies before I actually launched into writing the book.
And I think that's interesting on the, I don't think of poets as researching. So I think that's really cool to realize what goes into it.
Well, and also I'm a movie lover, and I just love sometimes just sitting back with a bowl of popcorn, maybe a beer, maybe wine, it just depends on the mood, and watching old movies like TCM and that sort of thing. And sometimes I'm really drawn to Fred Astaire movies, and I couldn't believe when I read this, and I don't remember where I got it, somewhere off an internet thing, that originally when Fred Astaire was being casted for a movie, their comments were so negative about him. Can dance a little? Come on. What the heck? He's one of the greatest dancers ever.
I was curious when I read that, did he get that much better, or were they just, full of themselves?
They're just being persnickety,
yeah.
full of themselves casting agents.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, he was absolutely a wonderful dancer when he was casting.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I haven't watched that much of his. So the quote was for the irony? For the irony,
and then the idea that he can't dance, and of course I can't dance literally, but he figured he really can dance, so it was ironic. And then of course he's no Lothario, because they looked at him slightly balding. They wanted to put him in this category. They were looking for dreamboats, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever consider a career in dance?
You know what? I actually did that, or music. I used to sing and play.
I don't think I knew that.
Music
what did you play?
I played the guitar and I sang coffee houses and things when I was in college. But then I kind of gave that up. So
you should come and join me at some of the open mics I do.
Well, I don't do so much of that anymore.
But you could.
I kind of dabbled in that. But
the Egg Roll Queen Cafe, Sunday nights, 5:30.
Yeah,
I expect
familiar.
to see you there now.
I'm familiar with that.
Right, because Barbaric Yop was there.
That's right.
So what kind of dance would you have done?
Well, I loved modern dance, especially in college. I did take some modern dance classes, and I was in some performances, and I worked in the dance studio at James Madison University.
Okay. Actually, my daughter-in-law spent her entire growing up years doing dance. And I believe my son, the one who's in Ireland, his girlfriend, also is a dancer, and she works in Winona. Yeah, Winona with some... I think she used to. I think she doesn't this year, but she had done some teaching. So before we run out of time, you have Footfalls, Tommy, Holy Comforter, and Persistence of Vision. Holy Comforter is the one we really haven't talked about. What are the themes behind that? Maybe behind Persistence of Vision, too. I don't think you've really told us what the theme is of that.
Well, the movies. That's the movie one.
Oh, the movies,
yeah.
Of course. Okay.
Holy Comforter, which was the very first book published by Bird Chapbook. They also did the first broadside, Holy Comforter. And that one is about growing up Catholic in the South.
In the South, no less.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, where you were among all the Baptists.
That's right, exactly.
I do want to ask you one question. I was thinking of the quote last night. Do you remember the line in Dirty Dancing where the father very proudly says, "Baby is going to change the world"?
Yeah, I do remember.
And the older sister is the good-looking one, and the waiter only has eyes for her and says, "And what's Lisa going to do?" And Baby very snidely says, "She's going to decorate it." I mean, very disparaging.
Yeah.
And so, I grew up like you. My father was a military officer, and we were supposed to be lawyers and doctors and engineers. We were supposed to change the world. Mm-hmm. And here I'm a musician. Mm-hmm. It didn't go over well.
Those darn artists.
What do you think the value of poetry is? Why do we do something that is not building bridges or hospitals, or what's the value in decorating the world?
Yes, well, I would agree with that point of view, that it enriches our lives, and it would be a pretty sorry world without it. It does bring contemplation, joy, beauty, ponderings about our human existence that are encapsulated in smaller bites than in long prosy pieces, perhaps.
Right.
So it is an enriching. I would say
it's funny. I didn't even think of this while I was going through the poems and the interview questions. But I actually do address this in one of my books where Amy is kind of one of the main characters. She's a musician, and she's seeing this guy who's a mountain rescuer. He's out saving lives all the time. My writers group jokes, Inga saved everyone in Scotland, and some of them twice. But, he's talking to her about a child that he lost, that he couldn't get to too far down a cliff. And she says to him, I don't do anything like you do. I don't save lives. And he says, but you save souls. After I've watched a child die, to be able to have music and poetry and art. I mean, he doesn't go on at length, but... Yeah,
because even the spiritual element of it.
We need to wrap this up. Do you have any upcoming events that people can see you at?
Yeah, absolutely. My next... Now, I didn't write it down, darn it. But anyway, if you go to my website, DonnaIsaacPoet.com, it's going to list a whole bunch of things. I have a lot of things in November because Persistence of Vision is coming out in November.
Do you have a launch party for that?
I have a launch party at Greece Literatura in Minneapolis.
Oh, is that going to be Poetry Happy Hour?
That's going to be Poetry Happy
wonderful.
Hour at
what,
the Troubadour.
What day is that?
I don't know again. I'm sorry.
It's a Sunday, though. We know that.
Yes.
I will be there unless, I lose a leg or something.
Yeah, so look it up on my website. It's got everything you need to know and more.
And we'll spell Donna Isaac, DonnaIsaac.
Poet.
If they can't spell poet, they don't deserve it.
.com, right. There you go.
Michael, where can we find you online?
aperfectpint.net. We are at Brews on Instagram and something or other on Facebook that has to do with books and brews.
Yeah, it's a long Books and Brews with Laura Vosica and Michael Agnew. And then our website is books and brews, and is spelled out, .net. And you can find me at bluebellschronicles.com. My publisher's site is gabrielshornpress.com. And next month, we have actually a fairly well-known author, Sarah, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, Sarah Stonick. She is the author of Vacationland and the sequel to it, Laurentian Divide, and I believe there's a third book coming out. Sarah has been awarded a number of grants, including a Minnesota State Arts Board Fellowship and a Loft McKnight Fellowship. Her first novel, These Granite Islands, was translated to 8 languages and was shortlisted for France's prestigious Grand Prix de Lectrices d'El. Do you think I came even close to pronouncing that?
I have no idea.
French is like the one language I'm not doing on Duolingo, so I slaughtered that. Her second novel, The Ice Chorus, has been reissued in paperback by Alma Books of England, distributing it in English language markets worldwide, and Laurentian Divide has been nominated for Minnesota Book Award for 2019.
Nice.
Fabulous.
So,
Look forward to that. Thank you, Donna, for coming in and joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I love your poems.
and
Well, thank
I'm
you.
sure that thanks to you, we will be up to 230 million
Oh, I
by
hope so.
next month.
I hope so.
All right, this has been Books and Brews, Episode 7. Thank you all for tuning
Donna
in.
Isaac.